Yeah, so Carl, thanks for joining us. Thanks for having a chat. In preparation for the summit, we're sort of talking to some speakers to get their thoughts and insights ahead of the event. But so to kick off, we're talking about process mining. So for in layman's terms, sort of in an industrial setting, what is it, and what specific business problems are you trying to solve by using it?
I think for me, process mining comes to it gets to the very crux of it, that we're after a single source of truth. I think in everything we do, you want clean data, you want single source of truth, and how you harvest it and gather it to have that factual to make decisions really. And I think the biggest thing in all my kind of work in life is people tend to think they know the answer without actually really going into the data. So I'm really interested in how do you get that data out, and how clean is it? Because people go off and chase the ball, but if the data is not clean, it's certainly a big worry to me, because you start to come to your own opinion of what's happening, but actually it's not correct. So I think process mining is something that we're quite immature at as a business, and a few of the questions later on will come to that. But yeah, you've got to start off with what actually is the real truth and what's it saying first.
Okay. And how does process mining, how's it aligning with Certec's broader digital transformation strategy?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're looking at now is we're on a kind of a level up kind of approach this year. We've done lots of technology, we've won bits of awards, but it's all about level up for me. So we're embarking this year primarily around A3 thinking, making sure that when you've got that data, we're using it for the right reasons. So clean questions, factual, and we're looking at the six hats at the moment, which is a really interesting book I read a few months back, in terms of, when you're trying to solve a problem, you can only write things on the board that are factual. If people are shouting it out, then it's not factual. You can say, I can write it, but not in this. That's a red question. Now you've got the red hat on. You're talking on emotion and feelings, but actually, can you quantify what you've just said? If the answer is no, we're not going to disregard what you're saying. We need to write on the board and say, you go away and come back with some real factual evidence on that. But don't, you can't come into a meeting and solve a problem as a team if you've all got emotional and kind of, so it's a really good book by a guy called Edward de Bono, I think it is. And yeah, it's that really kind of resonates with me. You got in my office, I've got 8 chairs, a big presentation screen, and everyone wants to solve the problem straight away. And it's like, but if you all follow it in the logical steps, what do we actually know about the problem before you get onto solution mode and doubting mode and black hat saying, oh no, that's not right, ain't gonna work. So I think that really is our kind of where we're at now as a business. We're dabbling with AI, but do we, a lot of things we're manufacturing now aren't the old fashioned body in white. We're manufacturing buzz bars now for EV. You can't solve the same problems that you did on body in white. And if you haven't got the toolbox to be able to think differently and get that clear data out, say what it actually is, the more complicated parts you start bringing in, and even with AI solutions, if you haven't got that kind of bandwidth to solve a problem, then I think that's where problems happen. So I think that's where we're on our journey that said, look, won a few things, done a few smart things, built our own MES on OEE, but let's start to attack this next year and get match fit really in our thinking mode. It's probably the key one.
That makes sense. Okay. So I mean, so would you actually say then that the AI is transforming manufacturing at Certec, and if so, if that is the case, how is it doing it? How is it having the biggest effect?
I think the biggest effect is how we built our own MES. So our kind of very similar to a SCADA system, where it's given us the intelligence now to be able to take that information and do something with. But when we built the system, it's very push, not pull. So it's based on operator led. And one thing I'm asking the engineers this year, now I'm in charge of the project now, is what's the machine saying? Not what the person's saying, because the person's going to give you, is it a single source of truth? If the machine keeps stopping for error 6 every time, the logs are going to tell you that it's error 6, if you know what I mean. So we can get some data out, but I'm really interested now in how we can how we really get into that kind of predictive stuff where it knows what's happened, it's telling you how to respond. So get more into proactive than reactive. You know, you don't want to tell what, you know, you don't want to fill the log in and say what's wrong with it. You want it to be kind of like doing everything it should do proactively. And believe it or not, no matter how many millions of pounds you spend with these big machine builders, they offer you kind of AI, but then, as far as I've seen now, with all the, and we've got some serious players in the automotive machine building kind of stage, they still build machines. Very hard to get the AI out of them in terms of you've got to pay for this, you've got to pay for that. Yeah, it's interesting because although they're making you a £15 running machine, when I ask a simple question like, can it self-diagnose what's wrong with it? And they go, no. You're like, well, it was £15 million. It should, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then, oh, I can sell you that for another X. Like, well, so yeah, so AI's, I think it's there in some of these new machines you buy. The willingness to give as part of that package ends up going to different levels of service, which is a bit frustrating, really, because you know you want that machine to do what it needs to do. And when you're dealing now, like some of the stuff we're making at Certec, it's not a press, it's not an assembly line, it's a press, assembly line, something else, an assembly line, and then it makes a part of the end. So you need that intelligence to be able to run that line. It's not like, you know, from years ago, how I manufactured years ago. If you stood next to something and shouted at it, or stood there to be a pain, it went faster, because the human would then say, "Oh, the bosses are watching. Let's knock the output out." But this type of kit we're buying now, commodities that we're in, it's how you can understand self-diagnostics, and I think that's where we're at now, understanding we've got some stuff here now, we've got some kit that's really expensive. You can get people around your factory, they go, wow. But then you go, but how do you know how well it's running every day? How do you know what it's doing? You know, and I think that's the bit where we are. It's going to transform it once we get it, but we unfortunately we didn't get it at the start, if you know what I mean.
Indeed,
I think like anything, there's maturity levels to everything, and you know, when I started out in manufacturing 30 years ago, you know, you top pocket guides, you know, shouted things, and then you move on a little bit, and you know, computers come in, and you know, it's all like an evolution, like evolution of kind of manufacturing. And I think now we're in a really exciting time. We just got to know how to read that data and put it in layman terms, really, to really help operations.